What up, though? What up, though? Testing 1 2 1 2. Yeah, we go. My mic sounds right. What up, everybody? Dwayne Barnes, MPA, coming to you for another week of AAS 477. It's an honor and a joy to have been with you all semester. We have counting this one and the next one, 2 classes left. This is class 9 of 10. Next week is 10 of 10. Well, actually 11 because week 0, I did it like college football. Week 0 was just a rundown of the first 2 classes I did: AAS 477, Economics of Jim Crow, and then AAS 477, Power and Protest Civil Rights. And we started here with Black Power. Ready to have a really good, fun discussion. A little bit different than some of the other ones we had. If you look behind me, on Black music, especially around funk of the 1970s, and how that went along with Black liberation. This class is, of course, Black Power, the fight for Black liberation, 1966 to 1980. And we're getting to the end of that discussion. It's been such a good semester. It's been a great opportunity to answer questions. And here, when I'm out and about, people saying, hey, I see your class, or seeing likes, or seeing comments, or seeing shares. It means a lot because right now, as a culture, we're going through a lot, especially around our history and preserving that history. And my role in the movement right now is to be a griot in the history, share that history, and ensure that it's there. It may not be online forever, but we will have a way to make sure at least we know it, and we can pass it on not only to us, but to the next generation, the generation after that, and generation after that. You might wonder, why am I sounding like this today? Well, last night I got a chance to go to the Michigan State game. Me and my son went down there and enjoyed the rivalry, yelled and screamed and saw a Michigan victory. We had a really good time. And so, kicked my butt, the nice long walk to the lot, the tailgating, the game, and all that good stuff. So I was a couple minutes late today. We got a lot of really good conversations today. Let's take a look here. So let's get into it for today. So this class this week is entitled Black Music Transition from Soul to Funk and Black Power Legacies, Reflection on Black Liberation and its enduring struggles. So we're going to talk about, in short, the history of Black music, including an emphasis on ownership and those who were fortunate enough to be owners in the space. We'll talk about the history as far as our genres, from spirituals to gospel to the blues to, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, soul, and into funk. And so we'll have a really good discussion there. It's while we are going to talk about that, we also want to talk about, as we talk about liberation, we want to talk about ownership. So the Black Power defined for this week is Don Cornelius and his plight with Soul Train, and how it became not only a powerhouse in music, but in Black entrepreneurship as well, Black business, and kind of the ups and downs with that. Once we get to the end of the conversation, we'll have a chance to kind of connect the dots between some of the COINTELPRO opportunities or adversarial relationship with Black liberation, and how it maybe opened the doors for more entertaining, distracting kind of notions in the 70s, money-making endeavors outside of revolution. So we'll get to that as we move forward. So let's jump in here. Let's see. Yeah, my slide deck to the stage. In the past couple of weeks, it's been a lot of crazy stuff going on. 2 weeks ago, half the class got censored for copyrighted material. Last week, my face went black, and you could see me, but you couldn't. You could hear me, but you couldn't see me. So I got another one up here just to make sure we're good on that end. If you see anything or something's not right, or you can't hear me, let me know so we can navigate that process. So again, we're going to be talking about the history of Black music, the transition from soul to funk, and kind of what that meant. Soul Train and its impact, and then the global legacy of funk and liberation. So before we get to this, I want to take a step back here. So as we talked about 2 weeks ago, the ownership of our image, Black image, and Black music has always been an issue because The power structure has always used our work as their profit generating instrument. So when we're talking about spirituals, all the way down to hip hop, what we doing today, there's always been a issue around ownership. So when we would see people who would own the music, or people who had a chance to uh, own it enough to allow others to enjoy it, we always took exception to that. Now, we were always the engine to a brighter future for America. That's from our time here with those who came here enslaved. There were free populations, there were other conquistors, and people who were going across the globe finding new things. Anybody who lived near a body of water got in that water, and they went looking everywhere. It wasn't just like one little small people came and they conquered the world. Anybody who was near a body of water got to that water, got in a boat, and they went looking around the world. So Africans made it here. Other people were here. It wasn't just 1492 ocean blue conversation. So those who unfortunately were enslaved or found themselves in an enslaved state, they always provided the economic engine of America, its innovation every single time, without a question. And music, as we looked at it with image and entertainment a couple of weeks ago, same holds true for music. Um, so this conversation that we're going to have is going to go over the history of music. However, I'm going to take special exception to those who were fortunate enough, that's documented, to show how it was owned. One of my passion projects in the near future, I don't know if in the near or in the future coming, because I got a couple projects coming after this class, is I want to look closer into the ownership of Black music, especially during segregated America, when we had to have our own stuff, when we weren't looking to get, on their charts, or that we didn't need their charts to tell how well our music was doing. How did we give account for our music in our own world? Those who were funding it and creating it and making it for the Chitlin circuit, making it for us. How did we do that? So I can't wait to kind of jump into that when I got some time after my next two projects. So ownership is going to be big. So that's going to fall into a couple of big categories, or a couple of people we're going to talk about. Let me see here. Have a lot of notes for today, and I think it's necessary because I want to have a very poignant conversation about this. So as we talk about ownership, we're going to talk about W.C. Handy, who was known to be the father of the blues, or the first man to transcribe the blues and profit from it, as a musical production and as a musical sheet music. We're going to talk about W.C. Handy and Harry Pace, who were the founders of Black Swan Records, that looked to do the same thing in the jazz era. We're going to talk definitely about Berry Gordy a bit, even though I've done that in every single class. Berry Gordy is somebody who I personally look up to, especially for his business acumen. And then we'll talk about Don Cornelius as far as Soul Train. So we're going to talk about everything, but we're going to give exceptional opportunities to those who were fortunate enough, by whatever means, to get a chance to own and distribute our work. So let's start with the history of our music, which, I'm always looking at it from an ADOS lens for this. So, our music traces back to the motherland, but I'm going to start it from when we got here, and that drum. So always going to start with the drum. But even before you had the ability to put together a drum, you had the ability to sing. And so I'm going to start with spirituals. Spirituals were a form of music for the enslaved individuals to communicate to one another, to communicate messages, and to just get through the tough times. So you hear stuff like "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home." Or you heard work songs, songs that I'm not even getting into all of that, but songs that they just kept them going during the workday, and kind of playing the dozens and having fun with one another and finding a way through. So the spirituals were, for me, I always, I had a love-hate relationship with the spirituals. As a kid, it was like, man, I want to hear about that. But as you get older, you find the joy and the passion that comes along with that music, and how it, made a huge impact. Go down Moses, when they saying, well, Harriet Tubman on her way. So, get these songs going. Follow the drinking gorge. It's one of my favorite ones. The North Star, you looking for that Big Dipper so you can get the heck up out of here. it was a lot of anonymous song makers, people singing songs from their soul, people singing songs from their heart, and trying to get closer to God and trying to get closer to themselves. And one of the big provocateurs of spirituals as it started to grow was through HBCU. So, young people would go to HBCUs, they would form like a little choir and they would go around singing these songs. One thing they call was it Nashville or Memphis? I think it's Memphis Music City or Nashville Music City. Was off the back of the Nashville singers who went around singing spirituals, earning money. So yeah, spirituals were something that the Fisk Jubilee singers, William Thatcher, Burleigh, and the likes. And so that moves forward into the gospel. And so gospel was always an interesting form of music. It was African musical tradition mixed with spiritual Christian spirituals, hymns, defining a genre that that put a lot of styles together. Um, for me, I think, this is a very interesting music because, gospel and the blues are like sisters, siblings. You played the blues on Saturday night and you did the gospel on Sunday morning. And that's, especially as another passion project, thinking about the gospel music industry, not just the singers. We always have a conversation about Black music and we always just talk about the people who did the work, which is important, and that's a big part of who we are and what we've done. But I always like to look at it, like I said, from an ownership lens. So history of the of gospel music industry and kind of who were the players in that space. But when we think about gospel, early gospel, we think about Thomas A. Dorsey, known as the father of gospel music, blended sacred lyrics with secular blues and rhythms, jazz rhythms to create a modern sound. This is from 1899 to a little bit past that. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Arizona Drains, and Charles Albert Tinley. So those are some of the voices. Then you start thinking about people like Mahalia Jackson, Sally Martin, Clara Ward, etc. Especially the Fisk Jubilee singers, the soul singers, Dixie Hummingbirds of the 40s and 50s. So as the industry moved even into James Cleveland in our era, kind of Kirk Franklin. So, I wanted to have this graphic, and I think I'll have it ready when I send out the follow-up of just looking at like the arc of Black music in time to kind of do a couple of things to kind of show how over the years, Black music has been co-opted into American music. And I say that two ways. Black Americans are American, don't get it twisted. But our music had become, popular music, starting with the blues we can start with. And that's kind of next in the chronology of our music. Blues music, I think, is a very interesting music. Three chord music that came from the enslaved or formerly enslaved, painful music about how I lost this, how it's so bad, and I got these blues. And how we, created the blues and it was co-opted into popular culture to be the music of America for a time. Um, and you talking about some of the pre-war Delta blues, uh Charlie Patton, Robert Johnson, Son House, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Lead Belly, um Blind Willie McTeal, all of these old school blues Delta. So if you saw the movie Sinners, that was a Mississippi Delta based movie, and you saw that kind of influence, even though that was the 30s. Then we talking about Ma Rainey. If you saw Ma Rainey's Big Black Bottom, that movie is on Netflix. And then we went to go see a play. It was down. We saw it in the city a couple weeks ago, probably a couple months ago now. Bessie Smith, she got a movie on HBO. Queen Latifah playing her. Mommy Smith, Memphis Minnie, all of these blues singers. Because blues was a very interesting kind of music. It got popularized in contemporary culture through the women singing it, but it started with the brothers playing on this guitar and this thing happening. So the blues is a 10-part class in and of itself, just all the nuances of our music, how we expressed ourselves and how we kind of navigated through that. So that's taking us to the 10s, the 20s, the 30s. And then that inspired, post-war urban blues with Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King, John Lee Hooker, Um, T-Bone Walker, Little Walter, my baby don't stand no cheating. If you ever seen the movie Chess Records, it's some of those people there. Um, and then, so I kind of was moving forward. I'll kind of go back into ragtime. Ragtime was like the mother and the father of jazz. It was the music that put together some of the syncopation of the gospel and the blues and its own thing. And so, ragtime was the music that, piano driven, very, very movement based music, kind of wartime music. And it was a music that you played on the piano, kind of stride piano or before stride piano kind of techniques, and that kind of fed into jazz. And then you get into jazz, who was known as the great American music. First it was the blues, right? Now it's jazz. You know what I'm saying? And jazz was a music that we cooked up. Jazz is a music that um, was birthed out of many black places. Some say New Orleans, some would say other places, some would say everybody kind of cooked up and made it, which come on, man, we know better than that. But jazz became the most popular form of American music. Even today, it's known as American classical music, birthed from the formerly enslaved down south and turned into an empire, similar to like hip hop. If you think about what hip hop turned, how it was birthed and where it was birthed and how it became the dominant form of music. And so we're talking about some of the early pioneers like Buddy Bolden. He had a movie on YouTube movies, I think it was called Bolden. You can find it and learn more about his story. Um, James Reese Europe. This is another New Orleans figure. James Jelly Roll Morton, King Oliver, all these early cornet players and these horn players. And then we even went into Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald, Bessie Smith, who was more a blues singer, but dibbled and dabbled in the jazz as well. And then it went, jazz. So, even if we talk about the blues and we talking about jazz, we're talking about two really huge forms of music. Jazz went 100 years, and still going today. The blues the same, 100 years and still here today. So it was many different incarnations of these two musical forms. Same with gospel. So many different incarnations of these forms that changed over the decades. So I'm just doing a quick overview because we're trying to get to the funk, but we can do a class in and of itself just on the blues, just on jazz and how it changed. So we're talking about, Charlie Parker during the bebop era of the 40s. We've mentioned the swing era with Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Then you get into more of the modern stuff with Miles Davis and Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, and some of his experimental jazz of the 70s, and we'll get to that. Mary Lou Williams, a prominent sister playing the piano and composer. Um, and so that music pushed us forward into the genre that we would call rhythm and blues. That's the 40s music. So still jazz was still kicking by the 40s. That was bebop. The blues was still kicking by the 40s. People loved it. But this new form of black music called rhythm and blues was birthed. And what rhythm and blues was, it took jazz, it took gospel, and it took its own kind of new thing to create this music that was fun music, that was people's music, that was segregated music that was 100% ours. And this music was big in, as we move through, the Great Migration, bringing Southern tradition up north. It was big during that time. It was one of my favorite songs is if you've seen the movie Malcolm X, it's a movie, or it's a song called um, Beans and cornbread had a fight, beans and cornbread out of sight, all that kind of thing. Louis Jordan, his Symphony 5, these kind of songs like that. So music that was really not jazz, not the blues, more of like fun music, more of people music, more of dance music. You also had songs like one of my favorite ones is called, and I guess I'll play a little bit of it later. Uh, Rollin' Pete. Rollin' Pete is another song from the Malcolm X movie. I get a lot of my song choices from the movies I watched growing up. And you hear this ragtime piano, stride piano playing, and this music singing on top of it. Oh, gonna be by yourself. One of the first songs you hear in the Malcolm X movie when he like go get his hair done. So these songs were really good. They meant a lot. I mentioned Louis Jordan. He was like the father of R&B. I was doing some research, and he spent the most time on the R&B charts. And so I do a quick aside. So the 40s is a time they had black music was called race music. And in calling it race music, because it wasn't necessarily owned by us, the music industry wanted to figure out how things were doing, how well were these investments. So you had charts coming out, Billboard charts, and all these different charts. Now these were still segregated. So ours was, race music. So, we think about the R&B charts, it started as race music. And that music is the music that, was our music. And we would cut the record and put it out and tour it the same way we would do today, just on the Chitlin circuit. And he was one of the most successful ones in that time. Even Ray Charles, who really was more, yeah, he was there, rhythm and blues, soul, early soul, heavy rhythm and blues of the 40s and 50s. James Brown, who was, still in that 50s, 60s, 70s. Sam Cooke, that was real soul music, but rhythm and blues as well. Muddy Waters up playing that blues. Little Richard, really big in rock and roll, but he was a part of the early rhythm and blues as well. Because, and even, Ruth Brown, Etta James, Mamie Smith, Aretha Franklin in the 50s and 60s and even 70s, even 80s. Some of her music is resurfacing on TikTok now. Sister Rosetta Sharp, the godmother of rock and roll, playing that guitar in the way you never heard it played before. And and this was also a time of non-black ownership of music. So you had Atlantic Records and Chess Records, if you saw the movie Chess Records with Beyonce and all these other people in there. Black music became a commodity. And so through jazz, through the blues, through rhythm and blues, you had all these white actors funding and producing this music and taking the profits out and not even paying the acts what they were worth. And then when you would start to see a big push of, especially during rock and roll and rhythm and blues, we singing, and then they come singing deep, 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 and then it go pop like Elvis and all these other ones, singing our music, and we don't get any credit for it, even though we wrote the song, we produced the song, we gave body to a form of music. It got sang by somebody else, and they reap the benefits. And I'm saying that for a reason. So that brings us to rock and roll. Rock and roll was just a mixture of the blues, and it was a mixture of rhythm and blues, and you just played it a lot faster, and gospel and country, and you just played it faster. So we talking about Chuck Berry's, we talking about the Little Richards, Ike and Tina Turner and their early stuff, Big Mama Thornton, who sang Hound Dog, Fats Domino, one of my favorite rock and roll artists. We all love Little Richard. You don't never get it twisted. We all love Big Mama Thornton and those other ones, but one of my favorite ones, and I let my kids listen to a lot of Fats Domino as well. Really country influenced, real rhythm and blues influence, and he was at the top of the charts as well. And again, because of segregation and because of the different places where our music lived, they would write the song and produce the song and cut the song, and it'd come out. Then you hear somebody else singing it with no soul and turn it into a #1 record. And so that really was a turning point in how we started to look at ownership in our music. You know what? I forgot about W.C. Handy and the blues. W.C. Handy was the father of the blues. I think I mentioned that. Okay, and then I mentioned Black Swan Records, the same. Yeah, so I guess I did mention. I kind of was moving too fast, but I'll make up for it with Barry. And so, from rock and roll music, we kept innovating. They kept taking it. We kept innovating. Then we went to soul. Give me 1 second here. My voice is, I guess they would say the frog in my throat. He was yelling and screaming at the game last night. So this brings us to soul music. Soul music is a fused version of R&B and gospel music. And a lot of people got in trouble for trying to play both sides. Remember, I always said with the blues and with gospel, you did one on Saturday night, you did play the other one on Sunday morning. We've seen that through our era with Kirk and all the rest of them. This interesting blend was something that led to a soulful version. It brought the soul from the church into R&B. So Ray Charles, who's like the father of soul, putting that changing a gospel song and just putting "Baby I Love You" over "Lord I Love You." doing things like that. Sam Cooke, who went from singing gospel to singing soul music and went to the top of the charts. James Brown as well, having that. Jackie Wilson, who Berry Gordy wrote some of his biggest hits, "To Be Loved," which I was introduced to in remember in Coming to America. Akeem was got with Lisa, and he's like, "To be loved, to be loved." Even as a kid, I don't know what it was about that song. I just really liked how he was singing it and how funny he was and doing it, and how people was yelling back at him like, "Shut up." Later on, I found that Berry Gordy wrote that song. And then Higher and Higher, Your Love, all those songs, all those, some of the best, A Lonely Teardrop, some of the best Jackie Wilson stuff. I love that 50s music, that rock and roll, that soul. I got a playlist I'm gonna I'm gonna get y'all the Black Power playlist, but it's a playlist that I found stuff from the mid 40s to early 60s, this kind of mix of R&B, rock and roll, early soul music, some of the best stuff that you ever heard. Then you got Aretha Franklin, who did the same, went from singing gospel to singing jazz to singing R&B. Otis Redding, Etta James, Solomon Burke, who did the same. And soul was such an interesting thing. I really want to take a couple moments to talk about ownership. So when we talked about ownership, and I talked about this a bit in the last class, what made Motown so unique and what made Barry so unique in his pursuit to think about ownership of Black music. And I think he was really the blueprint for how to do it. Remember, I mentioned the phenomenon where we would write songs, produce songs, cut songs, put them out. And because you were stuck in segregation, you were stuck on the Black radio station, which was nothing wrong with that. In my opinion, it just didn't give you the coverage that you wanted. You had to play the Chitlin circuit, which, maybe that was better than not having to play the Chitlin circuit, real talk. Others could come along, find your song, sing it in front of pop audiences, and now they wrote rhythm and blues. They wrote rock and roll. They wrote this stuff. What makes Berry Gordy, and that's, what I really have love for him for, is he said, all right, and I'm making a long story short here. Instead of allowing for that to happen, I'm going to own the label. And not only am I going to own the label, I'm going to integrate the music. So you're not coming and taking a cut of ours and turning it into something else. Remember on the movie Dreamgirls, they cut Cadillac Car. Oh, got me a Cadillac, 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 got me a Cadillac car. Then it was B-D-D-D-D-D, got me a Cadillac, Cadillac. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So he said, I'm positioning this music right down the middle. This is the sound of Young America. So when you first heard this song, you heard it straight down the middle of the road. So you're going to know Martha Reeves sang it. You're going to know the Temptations sang it. You're going to know the Supreme sang it. And you can't come and take that. So what made his empire so unique out of the many things that we won't even get to the Motown sound, we won't get to none of that. We'll just talk about the business approach of putting his music in a place where it can't get stolen, it can't get recopied, it can't get covered, and you get full access to it. Now, the only downfall of that, and to me, it wasn't a downfall, it just was a different version of soul and rhythm and blues music, is that he sanitized it a little bit. We want it to be tick tock, tick tock. We want it to be clean. We want it to be acceptable to the larger audience, kind of like how civil rights movement was. We want to be acceptable. We want to be in. We want to get in, and that's what we did with the music. So having that kind of ownership of the music, and being able to reap the benefits of your music as opposed to those who came before. Little Richard cut those platinum selling records that he didn't get paid for. He didn't get anything for. Same with Big Mama Thornton. You know how big Hound Dog was? Elvis made that, huge. He's bigger than Justin Bieber at the time. And our artists get none of that, seeing none of that, or if it didn't cross over, I'm just stuck on the Chitlin circuit. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. My music had the ability, I'm speaking as those artists back in the day, the music had the ability to reap me the rewards that anybody else's music would. But because I couldn't get access to that audience, or if I did get access to it, somebody else was singing my song, I had to get stuck on that side of it. So Berry Gordy opened the door to where Temptations, Supremes were just as big as the Beatles, just as big as all of those, the British invasion, just as big as all of that stuff. And I got to shout out to Jimi Hendrix too. When we talk about soul music, we talk about rhythm and blues, talk about rock and roll. He was one that also took the culture and put it down the mainstream and made himself an icon in doing that music. And so that brings us to, and of course, this is all in a nutshell. I'm just trying to get through it for the purposes of this conversation. So this brings us to, soul music is where this conversation ends and begins, because when you get to the late 70s, I mean the early 60s and the mid 60s, we already talked about, I'm not going to go over it over and over again. Music start to change, people start to change. You didn't want to integrate no more. Well, some didn't. And for the purpose of this class, we wanted Black power. We wanted a more a music that looked like us, a tenor that was ours, one that was a lot more representative of what we wanted and less of what our ancestors or what our parents wanted. And so this brings us to a crossroads here. So I'm gonna bring my deck back up and then we'll jump into the conversation here. Yep, spirituals, blues and jazz, W.C. Handy, Black Swan Records, the evolution of R&B and kind of what we wanted from that. Berry Gordy and his impact with Motown. Stax Records, which I give them their props from a musical perspective, but it was two husband and wife and a Black guy who put that company together. So I don't put it like I put Motown or some of the more or Soul Train, some of the Blacker owned things, because it just wasn't, but it still was influential. And respectability, sophisticated image. So a lot of it was really, really good. You think of Sam Cooke, you think of Otis Redding. You think of these people, really handsome, articulate, the sisters as well. Everybody was doing their thing. Freedom songs. I failed to mention that. So the connection gospel had to soul and gospel had to the 50s, outside of just the music, was during the civil rights movement. And I talked about this in the civil rights class. You took the music of the church and you turned it into freedom. So we shall overcome, or ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, gonna keep on walking, or now we headed to freedom land, let my people go. I'm gonna go tell Bull Connor, let my people go. So that kind of thing, taking stuff that was straight for the church and using it for politics and using it for revolution and movement. Even in Motown, early in Motown, Barry didn't want his acts in none of that stuff. He said, "We make music. That's what we do. We make music that you want to listen to and dance to. That your girlfriend broke your heart. That you in love. We want to show a different image." And so, "Dancing in the Street" was one of those songs where during the early '60s, when the Freedom Rides were going on, that song was looked at underground as a call to action. And it wasn't until, and we'll talk a bit about it today, it wasn't until What's Going On, 1971, I believe it was, Marvin Gaye, that Barry really started to lean into it. And then you saw War, and you saw some of these other songs, Ball of Confusion, some of this other stuff, Love Child by the Supremes. You saw these other songs really starting to get into the movement. So our Black power defined today, and I will take a moment to explain this a little bit more. Black power defined for this class are the different versions of how we wanted to interpret Black power. Black power is something that is, I think, a very gray area as it relates to what it is. We all know what the outcome is: freedom, opportunity, um, self-determination, all of those things. But people got there a lot of different ways. Just in this class, we looked at what Stokely Carmichael looked at. We looked at Fred Hampton. We looked at the Panthers and the 10-point platform. We looked at Larry Neal and the Black Arts Movement. We looked at, just last week, Earl Graves and his perspective on Black entrepreneurship. We've looked at so many different perspectives on how you define Black power through the different things that we were talking about. And this week we're at Don Cornelius, and I've been trying to get Don Cornelius in this conversation. Last week we talked business, and I kind of brushed over him a little bit, but I wanted to bring him back in the conversation about music, because during a time where you want self-determination, during a time where you want the opportunity to have a platform to show Black folks off the way you want them to be seen, and doing it through the lens of entertainment and music, Don Cornelius really played a big role in that. And so we'll look at his plight, Soul Train's plight, and then we'll kind of connect that, and then from there we'll go to a conversation around funk music. Now, Don Cornelius, born and bred on the south side of Chicago, Early was immersed in civil rights. Through Jesse Jackson and Dr. King when they came to Chicago, was a journalist by trade, served in the Army, and took a risk with a family, and he took a 3-month broadcasting class. He ended up getting a role in WCIU, and to make a long story short, he did a great job there. He really had a problem with the image of Black folks that you see on TV. The only place you would see us was in on the news at night, or what we wasn't doing, or what wasn't happening. Never never giving thought to the conditions that put us there, but just them Black folks, where they at, what they doing. And so, he said, what, I want to find an opportunity to promote Black folks and do it through the lens of music, and portray us in a different way. And so, he saw an opportunity. He said, there's no Black representation on TV. You only see us on TV as thugs and hoodlums and with drugs and with violence. He wanted to see us in a positive light. And so he went to WCIU, and he created and pitched an idea for a Black American bandstand, basically. One to rival them and one to show off Black culture, because American Bandstand, unless you was Motown, you know what I'm saying? Shout out to Motown. But unless you was Motown, you wasn't getting on there. You wasn't getting access. You wasn't getting it wasn't a platform for you to showcase your art, your culture, your style. And so, he pitched this idea to the bosses at WCIU. He said, there's an opportunity here. He pitched it, created the idea, and got 100% ownership. They said, okay, well, you can do it, but you got to put this together. We'll give you a set, but outside of that, all economics is on you. You got to deal with that. So he said, okay, well, cool. Put together the first in Chicago, the first Soul Train show, August 17th, 1970 in Chicago. It was on black and white. The show wasn't even taped. They ran it. And if there's no archival footage, because if you didn't see it, it's gone, especially those early years. But it was an overnight success. Blacks in Chicago who just recently dealt with Fred Hampton being murdered, who just dealt with, prior to that, Dr. King coming and trying to figure out how he was going to navigate, who just dealt with the breadbasket protest, was looking for an opportunity to be seen, looking for an opportunity to be heard, looking for an opportunity to see themselves on TV in a way that was uplifting and that represented who they truly are. So this was an overnight success. Blacks felt ownership in the show. They watched it. He was able to book Chicago the top acts out of Chicago at the time, because I didn't mention in our Black music history there, Chicago was a hub for Black music from the migration on. Blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, Black arts movement, kind of poetry and art. Chicago was, I mentioned earlier in the other class, Chicago could have been the place of the Renaissance. Could have called it Chicago Renaissance, but because New York was what it was and it had the power it did at that time, it pulled the title. But even all the Harlemites, they spent time in Chicago. Chicago was a hotbed of intellectual, business, political, and creative power. And so him doing this out of Chicago is no fluke. The same way Berry Gordy and Motown was able to navigate through bringing all that Southern talent up to the North, was able to turn it into a worldwide phenomenon as well. So, we're talking about acts like B.B. King, the Staple Singers, Curtis Mayfield, shout out to him, and the OJs. And what made, outside of the music, what made Soul Train, especially the early version, so unique were the dances, were the dancers and the dances. So they would find local teens. They recruited them from recreational centers. Imagine it being recreational centers. And they got them on there, and the show was revolutionary. It hit hard. It cashed in. It worked. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your stance here, Barry, you remember, for Motown, he took Motown from Detroit to LA. Well, Don Cornelius said, well, the hell with it. If Barry can do it, I can too. He took the show national, and the show went to LA. And so it got a complete makeover, national ambitions. You out in Hollywood. It's changing the entire kind of seen around what this investment into this company is. Remember, he had financial ownership, equity. He had everything. This was his. And so he took this burden on and he took it there and said, let's grow it. So I'm looking at this. And when I was defining it, I was looking at it a lot like a startup. So the seed or the early phase was Chicago. He got it off the ground. It was a success. The startup phase here is here when he, went to LA. So LA brought a lot of new opportunities. One, it gave a lot of mystique around the show. Color TV, and they started taping it for syndication. But he still had to grow his model. So we talking about December 2nd, 1971. Remember, I said 8/17/70 is when the show started. Well, by October the next year, he in LA. And instead of being in one city like Chicago, he's in 7 cities for the first year. So still a lot of growth opportunity, but a chance to see if this model really, really works. And so you get out to LA, you got to kind of try to find where you're going to get your soft spot, how you going to land, how you going to make your move. Gladys Knight and the Pips were the first, shout out to Motown, were the first guest on the show. And while he had a bigger audience now, he still was struggling to find his way into the musical establishment. So he had a tough time booking the top acts because one, they didn't know who he was, and the agents and the promoters and all of they didn't know who they were like that. And so he had to turn back to some of his good friends from Chicago, the OJs, Staple Singers, BB King, Curtis Mayfield coming. And then it's like, okay, you're starting to build some momentum. And now that you left your dancers in Chicago, you had to build a whole new set of dancers and talent. And what made this so unique is a employee there by the name of Pam Brown, who used to work in youth development in California and LA, who was connected to youth programming, brought these kids who used to be the same kind of way they recruited them in Chicago to LA, to the studio to audition. And Don Cornelius, being from Chicago, was like, what is these kids doing? What kind of dance is this? What is this? But it was this kind of dancing you've never seen before. So to make a long story short, they got there. The LA style of dancing was a hit. The audience loved it. And it started to really blow up. So you got the music acts that were something. You had the dancing, which was something. And then you had the style. So this is the time where people wearing bell bottoms, dashikis, medallions, braids, platform shoes, all this, looking like somebody from one of them blaxploitation movies we talked about last week. And it knocked it out the park. People from these 7 cities, the blackest cities, the same cities that were riot cities, were watching this stuff, and it was blowing up. Also, bringing the Soul Train line, which was, in our culture, it was something that was done in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s at house parties. Everybody go down, you show your outfit, you show your dance, and you bring it on through. Well, he brought it to a national audience, and it was a chance for you to see the individual expression of these dancers, their fashion, what they're up to. And one of the key moments and fun moments was when Mary Wilson was part of the Supremes. She did the dance with Don. Don, I wish I could play the clip. You want to come down and dance with me? And he went down there, and nobody knew he could dance. He was the boss, so he wasn't dancing, but he went down there with Mary Wilson from the Supremes, and kind of showed his little thing. So it was growing, it was changing, and not only is it growing as a cultural phenomenon, it's growing as a business phenomenon as well. So you're taking this man who it went from a shrimp in the industry to becoming a power player, showcasing and highlighting Black talent in fashion and style in ways that we hadn't seen, specifically targeted towards teenagers. Now we'll get back to that. So as it grew, by the end of season 1 in LA, it went from 7 cities to 50 cities. So this is the growth stage of a startup that you talk about. So it's blow, like Jamie Foxx would say, it's about to blow up. She wait, it's blow up. She waiting. Excuse me, my voice. And so now he's not having a tough time getting the talent in the door. You got a product that's working. You got a 60-minute Saturday morning show that's starting to produce revenue, starting to make you look real good. It's starting to spread around. The industry is starting to believe in it. So you're starting to get stars like Ike and Tina Turner, Marvin Gaye, Bill Withers, Patti LaBelle, and the kids are driving this talent. They got Aretha Franklin on, and I guess the story is her kids was like, "Well, mama, if you such a big deal, why come you ain't on Soul Train?" And she's like, "Oh, she get me on Soul Train," and she get on there and she kill it and do her thing. So it's really starting to become a place for big name stars, Stevie Wonder, the Jackson Five. Shout out to Motown. I keep mentioning all these Detroit acts because this is my angle I'm taking it from. And so you're all so as the stars are getting bigger, the dancers are as well. So what went from this fun little thing, now you get notoriety. So you're starting to see a lot more rivalry around dancers. And this rivalry and this competitiveness is bringing out the best dancing, the best moves, the best fashion. So people starting to use props and wearing costumes. But the other side of it is, this thing is getting big. So now you working longer hours. The food may not be as great. You wasn't getting paid for it, but you're getting paid in exposure. And so this thing is building. Dancers are starting to have an influence on what people are doing in the 50 cities around the country. So if somebody had on the bell bottoms, everybody about to wear them now. If somebody had on this nice little chain, everybody wanted around the country. So you're building this culture within a culture that's very interesting, and you're starting to go out further than just your audience. So even the labels are sending these acts here saying, go ahead and sit on Soul Train and let's see what we can do for your career. And so, Don is becoming a new force now as an entrepreneur, and just as this business is really, really growing. And the biggest players want it in. And so, became the biggest and best promotional vehicle for acts during that time. So Teddy Pendergrass, the Isley Brothers, um, the audience was a big part of it. It was started to outrate American Bandstand, which when you start going after the big dogs, competition was going to come. So Dick Clark and the network said, okay, well, let's make our own version of it. So they put together a show called Soul Unlimited, copied his style, copied the dancers, copied everything with Soul Train Light, zero sugar, Soul Train. But through some of his Chicago allies, Jesse Jackson came out and said, nah, man, y'all infringing on his intellectual property. It ain't right. Y'all trying to stop this brother from doing something. Y'all got 50 shows. It ain't happening. So to make a long story short, Dick Clark and them lost this battle, and it went off, and then Soul Train went to the next level. And so, as the business started to grow and as you started to secure your base, you got to continue to innovate to get the thing going. And that's what they did. Soul Train specifically was a place where Black artists would come and perform their music, but they would lip sync. And the reason why he had them do that is he wanted it to sound just like the record. He wanted you to see this polished piece, hear this polished piece, and it worked. Well, he said, well, now let's kind of add some vibes to this. So the biggest and the best stars, every once in a while, we're gonna have them come perform live. So you're talking about people like Sly and the Family Stone, which we'll talk about a lot more as we move forward. Barry White and his 40-piece orchestra, Al Green, James Brown performing with a full set, which was tough, from a business perspective. He's taking all the risk here. And so economically it was tough, logistically it was tough, so they were few and far between, but those episodes were most memorable. You got your biggest stars, the most watched stars doing live performances. You're shaking it up, so you're bringing more and more into it, and Soul Train is taking off like a rocket. So you get to the early mid 70s, around 74, the show is going strong. They said, well, let's get a new song, let's figure out what we can do to innovate this thing a little bit more. And so, being an industry powerhouse now, Don Cornelius reaches out to Gamble and Huff from the Sound of Philadelphia. Shout out to them. I gotta spend more time on them. I'm a Holland Dozier Holland kind of guy. I'm a Smokey Robinson kind of guy. I'm a Willie Hutch kind of guy. I'm a Norman Winfield kind of guy. I'm a Motown and Motown proxy kind of guy. So I give them all the props. But in the 70s, Gamble and Huff and the Sound of Philadelphia was the new Holland Dozier Holland, specifically in on the Black side. Holland Dozier Holland was pop, writing songs for the Supremes, and that was Smokey. We was middle of the road getting that real money. But the Sound of Philadelphia, have deserved their equal shout out as well. So shout out to the Sound of Philadelphia, Gamble and Huff. He reaches out to them, said, I need a new song for the show. And they cook up a song. and it went to number one on the charts. I don't know if I can see. I want to play it, but after a couple weeks ago, they took me down. I don't know if I can play it. So I'll see if I can get it in. Or let's put the Soul Train theme up and see if I can get that up without them getting me. But Don Cornelius said, "Don't call it Soul Train," even though it was Soul Train, Soul Train. You know the song. And he said, "Okay, we won't. We'll call it the Sound of Philadelphia," which was this mix of funk, soul, with a sprinkle of disco, the good side of disco at that time, if you will. Um, and so the song goes on to be a hit on Billboard, number one on the charts. Um, and Soul Train is headed in a new direction. So, I've been looking at this in a startup perspective. And so, you start your journey, you get some seed funding, you grow a little bit, you get to your growth stage, and then you get to the point where you mature, and it's just a top line business, and then you exit. We ain't there yet. So as the brand started to grow, it also became a place for social and political commentary. Remember, through our conversation during this time, school desegregation is happening. So the kids watching this and their parents, are dealing with busing happening, or pushback against some of this desegregation. You had the Vietnam War finally wrapping up. So the Bloods, we called them young black, the Bloods, which were the young black soldiers that were sent to fight there, were coming home to finding no jobs and no opportunities. And you got a president that's getting a Watergate scandal, and a president resigning, and Law and Order happening, Panthers getting killed, and Black Power getting dosed with their version of waters and hoses through COINTELPRO. And so it became a place where you could speak to the Black community. It has such big reach. You knew that at a certain time on Saturday, Black folks were sitting down watching Soul Train, because one, you couldn't tape it back then. Wasn't no YouTube back then. Wasn't no VHS back then, so you couldn't even tape it and watch it. You had to watch it as it was going on. And so he turned back to his old friends like Jesse Jackson and them to speak to the youth of America. And then as they continued to build the brand out, it was an opportunity for them to use edutainment, is what I call it. So they added another feature, the scramble board. So the scramble board was, we all seen it before, the little wall up there. You decode the word or the name, and it was always a Black historical figure. It was always, a hit maker or somebody that contributed to the Black culture. So it was another way to say, okay, we're gonna teach you something, and you're gonna dance, and you're gonna have fun, and we're gonna talk a little bit of politics, and we're gonna show you just entrepreneurship and building the brand from the bottom. Now, it was also an opportunity to set the standard on sponsorship and partner deals. Um, Advertising is how you keep your show on TV. And at that time, African American folks have very few um products and commercials directed directly towards them. And one unique thing, we talked about this gentleman last week, George Johnson, who was the president and founder of the Johnson products, Afro Sheen most specifically, were showing ads to young Black people about what mattered to them, showing them in their own light, showing them in the way that they wanted to be seen. So I want to take just a minute and show a little bit about that, because for two reasons. One, it tied into the Black entrepreneurship that we talked about, or Black business and Black labor we talked about last week, and a lot to do with using those images of Black folks, afros, dashikis, bell bottoms, revolutionary looks that people had back then, and kind of leveraging that. So I'm gonna pull up this clip, and we'll look at the little summary of the of that. Now, hopefully, I don't lose you with this. Let's see here. Oh, let's see. All right, here it is. All right, I'm share my screen. If I lose you, I'll be back. But I think this is important to the conversation.
The positive images didn't stop there. Don's revolutionary sponsorship deal with black-owned Johnson products finally gave Soul Train viewers TV ads they could actually relate to.
I'd like to ask you specifically why you felt it was important to sponsor a show like Soul Train.
I think Soul Train is the right show for our company because it reaches our market directly.
Hey, now, mama.
Some of the early commercials were just awe-inspiring to our audience and a definite first.
Tally ho!
You just did not see commercials that were directed toward African Americans back in the 1970s.
Here it comes. And me with the most untogether natural in town.
They were speaking to me.
But you need this Afro Sheen hairspray to give your hair sparkle.
That smells nice too.
The voiceover sounded like an African American voice.
When Fox Hunting, be sure you're ready with Afro Sheen.
It was amazing. These products were just reinforcing the idea that black is beautiful.
Makita, serene, majestic, beautiful Queen of Sheba. And now out of the mist of 3,000 years emerges today's beautiful black queen. Naturally beautiful, radiant. She is black essence.
There was a real sense that the afro was a radical statement, particularly for women. Women still wore straightened processed hair most of the time. So for a woman to have a natural, whether it was short or long, was a remarkable political statement about acceptance, about black beauty.
Probably the best Afro Sheen commercial I've ever seen. It has to be seen to be believed.
Haven't you forgotten something?
Say who were... Hey, aren't you Frederick Douglass? Yeah, we studied about you in school yesterday. About how you were a slave and how you took your own freedom. And then began to fight for freedom and dignity for all our people. Say, but what did I forget?
Are you gonna go out into the world with your hair looking like that?
The ghost of Frederick Douglass basically tells him his fro's not tight.
That's a mess. I've been watching the progress of our people, and I'm quite familiar with the natural. And I'm also aware that it is worn as an outward expression of pride and dignity.
Believe it or not, I still use Afro Sheen. Frederick Douglass only has to tell me once.
Soul
Yeah, so that's that's a very unique something we take for granted now. We've seen companies get it wrong. Those McDonald's chicken nuggets is what I need, or Coach Prime and his family. I'll take it, or Mary J. Blige. I'll take it. This we've seen it, but this was the one of the first times you saw things like that happening. So not only did Don Cornelius and his plight get people in front of the camera, he led the charge, especially being in Hollywood and being one of the first blacks with a show on TV, opened the doors for black producers, PAs, floor people who could ensure that there was an industry experience and access into the industry that they wouldn't have got prior. So now we talk about the maturity phase. We talk about a startup company, maturity phase. And so by the end of the third season, not only was the show a success and all of that, he became one of the most prominent business entrepreneurs in black music, in TV, with this show. And the first to have the executive producer title. This show was produced by Don Cornelius, which at the time was huge. So now we're about to the mid 70s, about 1975. So we get to 1975, things are, black culture is in a very interesting space, entertainment wise. We talked about how the late 60s to the early 70s, COINTELPRO and the government undercut black power as far as politics. So you got Panthers dead, you got revolutionaries imprisoned, you got COINTELPRO ensuring that people are getting not fair cases, you getting kids pointed towards other things. This is what they were pointing them to. And I want to be clear about this. This in no way, like I was talking about 2 weeks ago with blaxploitation, this is in no way incriminating those artists, those entertainers who were pursuing their gifts, their goals, and their abilities in culture. But there was a intentional effort to say, no, don't look at Huey Newton, don't look at Rat Brown, don't look at Angela Davis, don't look at Assata Shakur, don't look at Panthers in these cities, don't look at revolutionaries, look at TV, look at dancing, look at music, look at athletes. So we talking about the black exploitation 80s. Watch the Mac. Watch Queen of Sheba, Cleopatra Jones. Watch Cotton Comes to Harlem. Watch all that. Watch the Jeffersons. Watch Sanford and Son. Watch Good Times. Watch Soul Train. You know, as opposed to you being in your community, taking part in revolution and ensuring that things are done the way they should be. Let's distract you with some of this stuff. And it was successful. And those who were now, it didn't mean that everybody who went and pursued these interests were able to do it. Everybody who wanted to do a movie didn't do it. Everybody who wanted to make a Soul Train didn't do it. Everybody who wanted to make a hit record wasn't able to do it. But those who were talented enough did capitalize with quality products, and it did go through the roof. So mid 70s, black exploitation is huge. Sitcoms on TV are huge, and Soul Train and black music is starting to be cool. Not revolutionary anymore, not thought-provoking and opportunity to get freedom, but just cool. Look how I walk, man. Look at my song, baby. Look at this. Look at what we doing. It's soul. As opposed to what we talked about early in the conversation is we want land, bread, freedom, the ability to determine ourselves. We want political power. We want economic power of our community. We want to feed our babies. We want to educate our babies. We want to do that. Nah, y'all just go watch some TV and watch your favorite TV show, listen to your favorite music, do your favorite dances, buy all these products we want you to buy. Don't worry about no revolution. And so that's, you got to have that context when we're talking about this conversation. So this success brought crossover appeal. I didn't do a lot. I kind of left this out on purpose. You know, white acts getting in the fun because of the popularity and influence of Soul Train and that thing. And then Don Cornelius looking for a way to get to a wider audience, to make more money, to have more advertisers, to grow the business and do what you should do to get more exposure. So I'm not bad about that. As the show grew, it brought opportunities for the dancers. Their rerun from What's Happening was one of the dancers. It started to expose dancers that would influence hip hop, the Pop and Lock, the Robot. Michael Jackson, when he got on with the Jackson 5 and they dancing, and he doing the robot and it looks so fly. That was, came from LA. That came from Soul Train, which, they lived out in LA anyway. You had in 4 years, it became, a lifestyle. It wasn't just something you watched on TV. It was something that, influenced who you were. Everybody watched it. It was an institution and it grew. By the mid 70s, Don became a heavyweight in Hollywood. And started to really diversify the show. Now, at that same time, disco was coming. And so, this is a Soul Train. This is for the Soul Brothers. This is for us. Disco really wasn't for that. That was a New York vibe. That was for the ladies and the gayties. That was for that vibe. And so he had a tough time adjusting to that. But he said, well, when I think about disco, which, he thought was soulless, those who make the best disco was the sisters, Donna Summers, etc. They made the music. Diana Ross, she was doing that by then. They made the music that had at least some soul to it. So I ain't gonna play all that other disco stuff, but I'll play black disco stuff that we like, and I will play that. I will budge on that, because at the same time, you got shows like Disco Magic, Disco 77 coming out, really trying to challenge this thing. And you got to, when you're sitting in pop culture changes. So you got to find a way to keep up or navigate. So the best black records they would play, and we'll hear about that as we move forward too. But that began to change the show from the core audiences. They took the sign away. It became more New York centric as far as some of its vibe. And so you had to kind of adhere to what the market is telling you. So he started, as the company was still doing well, we started to continue to build on the successes he was having, started a new label, put out the group Shalimar, which had a hit record. One of the dancers, Ray Daniels, I think his name was, he showed the moonwalk for the first time. And in a couple years, Mike would take it, same way Mike took the robot and took it to the world. He would take the moonwalk and take it there. But, Mike and them lived out in LA, and that's where they taped Soul Train. So it was, influenced out there. So as you get to the end of the 70s and into the 80s, and I'm going to slow it down here, now you got past disco. Okay, disco is behind us. Now, guess what's cooking up out of New York? Boom, boom, boom. hip hop. And so now you got a new decade coming, and we won't get too far into it because we stop in 1980. This class stops in 1980, but you got a new thing happening. The 80s are dawning. You know, you heard the song, Ain't No Stopping Us Now. You got a new black kind of class happening through some of this integration, through some of the civil rights work, through some of the opportunities that are coming. You got a new black middle class with expensive taste and looking for leisure. Well, hip hop came and showed the opposite of that. They showed the story of what government disinvestment looks like, what crack looks like, what mass incarceration looks like, what violence looks like, what loss and disappointment looks like. So, you know, hip hop was bringing a totally different vibe. We talking about the Furious Five and the Message. We ain't even get to the gangster stuff yet. And so Don, you know, didn't really like that rap music, that rebel music, that profanity music, no respect for elders. They're not even singing. And so it you know, was a thing that, you know, they had to embrace, but it wasn't something that was easily done. Now, to make a long story short, Don Cornelius went on to lead uh Soul Train into the 90s, and he passed it over. He ended up eventually selling it for an undisclosed amount. I've been doing everything in my power to figure out what he sold it for. But you know, our Black Power defined and our moment in music was Don Cornelius and Soul Train. So that was an amazing kind of ride, looking at a black entrepreneur came after Berry Gordy, really keeping that ownership model alive. So any questions, anything, any feedback about Soul Train as we move forward? Oh, and then, you know, behind me, you'll see the funk, all these different funk albums. So let's take now that we looked at our Black Power defined, let's look more into funk music. And so the funk was a very interesting thing. And one of the major themes of this class has been, you know, the transition from what was to what is. So at this moment in time, you have an opportunity to see we go from, you know, we shall overcome to fuck that, we want Black Power. And the music was doing the same thing. So as the soul was kind of, and the soul I'm talking about, Motown soul, was a very sophisticated soul. But then you had a Southern soul, Stax Records, you had, you know, Atlantic, you had these other kind of soul outfits. But people were saying we're tired of that. We tired of that. We tired of that. We tired of that. So let's see. We touched Motown. We talked Johnson Publishing, selling to the Negro. Let's jump into Black Power. Here we go. So this is the era of Black is Beautiful. And this needed a soundtrack. The music, baby, baby, where did our love go? That didn't do it. I've got sunshine. That don't do it no more. I don't feel that no more. Say it loud. Boom, boom, boom. I'm black and I'm proud. Boom, boom. Say it loud. Boom, boom, boom. I'm black and I'm proud. Or don't do nothing for me. I go get for myself. You know what I'm saying? They wanted some other stuff. So music got rougher. It wanted to get more aggressive. I want to be as black as I want to be. I don't want to do nothing to accommodate to what you want. And it was a generational change, anti-conformity. We don't want to conform no more. We want our afros as big as they want to be. I want my clothes as black. I want my afro black. I want my beret black. I want my bell bottoms on. I want my platforms as high as I want to. I want to walk with a limp. I want to talk, you know, either like there's a revolutionary brother. I want to talk like a pimp, baby. I want to do it my way. I ain't trying to be like you no more. And so James Brown come along, do splits and spins and sweating, and his voice, his style, his articulation. This is not the tracks of my tears. No, we ain't doing that. Hit me with the work. That's what we talking about. We trying to get black. And so, you know, it's all about the groove and the rhythm that came, and the vamp that came from gospel music, the groove and the rhythm, the bridge. And so, you know, you think about, I got soul, boom, 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 and I'm super bad. This stuff, we ain't talking about love and all that. We talking about some fire here. I'm black and I'm proud. 1968, anthem for the Black Power movement. It taught Black pride. Be who you are. You know, he was the architect of funk. You know, gonna have a good time. Boom, 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 boom. Ba-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. You got this rhythm. You got this thing happening. Now, James Jamerson and the Funk Brothers brought that rhythm, baby. Don't get it twisted. They did their thing in that Hitsville Studio One, but this was a different kind of rhythm. This is a rhythm that was for us. This wasn't for them the middle of the road. This was for us. And you got the one. So he brought this concept. If you look at it in the movie, Get On Up, he's telling the band what to play. And then one of the musicians is like, Mr. Brown, that don't work musically. This ain't right. He said, well, I don't give him what you say, play it my way, and this is what it is. So the one, on the one, bow. On the one, bow. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what funk music was. Let me see. I'm gonna play this clip. I want to play this clip. I think it'll really explain it without having to go too far down the hole. Right here. Yes, sir. I want to do this for the purposes of this conversation. I can only show you so well. I'm gonna let the master show you how the masters looked at funk and did funk. So here it is. And remember, Bootsy played in James Brown's band after he fired all his acts. I mean, his musicians.
1, 2, 3, and you hit on the one, you know, one, you know, and then you would try to fit your different notes, what you felt in between that, like, you know, and that's the funk, you know, and you can change that, you know, it's however you feel, but you just have to fit it between that space, that little space that you got, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you know, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then you go back to your funk. Here you go, 1, and then you want to break down, 1, 2, 4, you know, and there you go. You got your basic funk formula there. You know, you can do anything you want to do with it. You know.
And so this rhythm, this one, unlocked a different form of dance, expression, and in funk, similar to gospel, you stayed there. And so I used to always wonder when I was watching Soul Train and you see a rerun of everybody like, boom, or all that little dances they would do back in the day. It's because that one was it got you in a trance. You knew what to do. It's kind of like boom, 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 boom. If you shout at church, if you've been any kind of Pentecostal in any of your life, it gets you there. And so people would get into this funk, and it was a space. It was spiritual. It was real. I remember going to church growing up, and we would always try to play the stuff we wanted to. You're like, man, you can't play that stuff, man. That stuff come with other things. I understand it now. I get what they were saying. So you get lost in the groove. It was a trance-like state. It took you over. It was in a euphoric trance kind of sense, and you just enjoyed the music. You was young, you wanted to hear that kind of music. So James Brown was the father of it. That kind of moved us forward to Sly Stone. We just lost him recently as well, and it's a documentary Questlove did on Sly Stone that was very interesting. Sly Stone was always an interesting figure. When I was exposed to the music, I liked the music, and it was always something. I remember it's always movies with me growing up. 2 movies I could think of, Sly Stone music really kind of resonated. One in the movie Money Talks. It's a scene where the Chris Tucker character trying to go meet with his girlfriend because he on the run. And the song come up, if you want me to stay, I'll be around the day. All that. I was like, what song is that? And then on a movie, one of Martin's, not one of his best ones, but Black Knight, where he gets transposed back into the dark ages of knights and all that stuff in Europe. And they ask him to sing a song, and he like boo doo 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 doo. He basically do dance to the music, and that's the song he do. So that dance to the music. And then Everybody is a Star. I remember the Roots did a version of that. So, getting involved, being an African American studies major, you got to go down some of the greats. And this music was always something that I always, liked. But so Sly Stone came into the game from from Northern Cali. So when we think about what was going on in San Francisco, what was going on in Oakland with the Panthers, what was going on, Free Love era, his music took the funk to dance music in a more pop way. It was the musical version. They call it If I Have a Dream. It's going to be integrated. They had women in the band. They had white folks in the band. They had brothers in the band. They had everything. Horns. They had everything. So it was a different composition of the band. The music was open because of the influences that they had, gender, color, Summer of Love vibes, all baked in musical tradition. And all I need is a drummer. And so it's bringing this brand new thing. They called it hippie funk because it was out there in Northern Cali, birthed during the late 60s and 70s. They're in those movements together. James Brown was funky in the pocket. Sly Stone took that pocket and took it to outer space. And we'll talk more about outer space in a minute. Because remember, 1969, we went to the moon. And that was a very interesting and tough kind of conversation around a lot of Black folks. We going to the moon and we got poverty. We going to the moon and y'all killing Dr. King. You're going to the moon and we can't go to school. We're going to the moon and you got all this money to go to the moon. Remember I played that clip by Gil Scott Heron, Whitey on the Moon. I played that one a couple weeks ago when he did that poem. It was tough for us to handle. So I was saying that we get into the moon. Okay. Even thank you for letting me be myself. It was a different kind of funk, but still. And we got a taste of that again with Janet Jackson. Shout out to Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Also, a new form of musical ability. Larry Graham, Drake's dad's brother, the slap bass form, where it used to be you play James Jamerson kind of a way. He would slap it with his thumb and pluck it with his finger. So it was a brand new rhythmic drumming form of bass. It took the world by storm. I won't play that for time's sake, but that was another thing that happened. So Sly took the template that James Brown gave and added another layer on the funk, and it became pop funk. It was middle of the road, but it was still funky. And so that brought you to a new era in funk. We talking about who I used to call the funk himself, George Clinton in Parliament. So, they started in Motown, and they, I remember one thing I was watching this documentary. He was like, the thing about Motown is they expected every song to be a hit. They expected every single song to be a hit. Not second place, not third place, not top 10. They expected every song to be a number one. And we had a couple good songs, but we wanted to do something else. So they left the funk. They left Motown and they did their own thing. They had their own songs. If you listen to I Want to Testify by the Parliaments, 1967 in full Motown form. But things were changing. Rock was coming in. It was the British invasion. It was the Hendrix, changing things. Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stone, Cream, as they would say. And so, rock was taking over. And they said, if you play Motown loud, then you playing rock. Now, this ain't the rock and roll we started with Chuck Berry and Big Mama Thornton and Little Richard and Fats Domino, none of them. This is when it was co-opted and changed. That's why we kept changing our music. And so you get, this funkadelic, psychedelic thing, this funkadelic happening. You took psychedelic music and funk and put it together. So now you got funkadelic. And it changed the look and the feel of funk. James Brown was one thing. Sly and the Family Stone was another thing. Now you're getting into this different kind of, I call it underground funk. Think of like records like Cosmic Slop or a record like Flashlight, 1977, where it completely changed music in the fact where you had, first James Brown putting you on the one musically, then you had slap bass happening out of Sly Family Stone, Well, now you even transitioning further in funk music, and you got ba-doo boom 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 ba-doo ba-doo all this. Dude said, I'm not even gonna play the bass. I'm just gonna play the keyboard and put a synthesizers on the keyboard and play a bass. And so it changed music. It was the audio version of an explosion, and it changed the way you play music. Bernie Worrell, the keyboard player from Parliament, totally changed it, and it changed the way people would approach it. He even said he was playing it like he was playing a Larry Graham bass line. It was a watershed moment in funk music. So this music is changing musicians, it's changing the art form, it's changing everything. And so even with, socially, funk became, therapy. It was freedom. It was Black folks being funky, being what they always were. The music, the fashion, the art that we talked about, making something out of nothing. It took rock, jazz, and what would hip hop would go back and sample it and turn it into something. It was crossing the lines between secular and spiritual. The dominant 7 chord, especially during the 70s, you had an opportunity to musicianship was big. So there's a lot of musicians that was playing the funk on Saturday night, like they used to be playing the blues. They went to church and played on Sunday morning. So it was really crossing those lines. It was even getting spiritual. We talked about the spirituals earlier. Swing down, sweet chariot, and let me ride. So it's even tapping into something bigger than just the music and being that you tapping back into the want for freedom. You tapping back into pain and love and sacrifice. So this music was really deep rooted in the musical expressions that we've had that we talked about today down the line. And so, funk even went to space, baby. It even went to space, 1969, we went on the moon. And that, triggered some who wanted revolution, but it triggered the imagination of those who wanted, to see a world that's not like this. We even tapped into it during the first Trump administration as far as Afrofuturism. Sun Ra, a jazz musician, Fantastic Voyage, the power of funk. Jimi Hendrix was taking the music out of space anyway, so it went there. Earth, Wind, and Fire, the LaBelle, Patti LaBelle and her group. These funky girl groups coming out, Creole Lady Marmalade, A Hope in Tomorrow. So you're looking at the future as an opportunity, or space as an idea of the future. Even the Mothership, you saw George Clinton and them at the what's name? They would sing the song and go on the Mothership and go to another place. So it was an opportunity to, funk music, was really taking music to another dimension. Let's see. And so, the question became, well, what's the funkiest place on earth? Where was the funk born? And what's the funkiest place in our United States? Going back to the Great Migration. The Midwest was where the industry jobs were. Detroit, Ohio, Illinois, Pennsylvania. And so, the industry jobs brought they weren't perfect, but they brought a stable income. Stable income, you buy a home. When you buy a home, you got a garage. You got a school program you got a school with a music program. So now these kids who would go to school, it was a requirement. You had to take an instrument. You got these kids learning an instrument, going home, going to play in the garage. And that's how, funk was born. The proximity of the cities, Dayton, Cincinnati, Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, Gary, South Bend. You know what I'm saying? Even out to Minneapolis, where we get to meet a young man named Prince, who made sure that the 80s, that funk and rock would merge again. So you take Jimi Hendrix, you take Parliament, you take I would say Junior Walker and the All Stars, Sly and the Family Stone, and you come up with this Prince character who took the funk to the 80s and the 90s. So that's kind of where you were there. And then also, our music has always been a global music. Funk goes global. So Africa was always a big consumer of of US products. It pumped in soul, and it led to we talked about some of their anti-colonial movements as well. So it was soul in Africa. And even during that time, some of our biggest and brightest were going to Africa. Malcolm X went to Africa. Ali went to Africa. James Brown went to Africa. Eldridge Cleaver and the Panthers was over in Africa. And so, when we went there, we were treated very well because one of the revolutionary kind of tones, and then two, the connection we had with the motherland. So then that brings, funk from Africa, Fela. If you know anything about Fela, was the, kind of the father of Afrobeat, kind of the, the James Brown of Africa, R&B and African style. And they used their music for political expression. And then you had a hit here, as we take our hits there, hit came here with Soul Makusa. But the beat, not tear the roof off his mother, tear the roof. It was the other one. And brought the funk here back, from the motherland to here. One of my favorite funk albums was Maggot Brain, 1971, Parliament. And it was a album that I was exposed to right here, right above my head here. Where can I find it? Right there. A couple of my favorite songs on there of all time, and just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And then funk went pop as well. We talked about the same kind of thing happening at Soul Train. So David Bowie, Elton John, people, like that kind of really getting in on the funk. And then you also saw a change. So as the politics change and you take the musicianship out of school, we don't need a music requirement in school no more. Well, you got kids not playing instruments, but their parents do got a sound system and they still want to play their favorite records. And since I don't know how to play an instrument, I'm gonna put one record on the turntable, I'm gonna put another record on the turntable, and I'm gonna go, or I'm gonna sip it back, swipe it back. Hey, swim it back. Hey, swim it back. And that kind of gave birth to hip hop. The turntables turned into an instrument. So funk is always evolving. Funk is always kind of doing its thing. And I think, when you think about funk music as well, you still got to think about soul, because it was like the same kind of music. It just was black music that was funky and that was soul. Because you still have people like Marvin Gaye. You still have people like Stevie Wonder, Curtis Mayfield. You still have people like Isaac Hayes and Bill Withers and all these other acts still making soul music, but it was kind of merged into one. At the blaxploitation music, you see I got a couple up here, that was funk and soul. And you still had jazz going, Herbie Hancock, in this fusion of music. You still had all of these things happening in black music that was expressing, kind of where we wanted to go and where we were. So I'll leave it here and I'll keep it here. Any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Let's see. Black music was always an opportunity for us to express ourselves through the years. In the 70s, it really expressed who we wanted to be, what we aspired to, and the freedom we wanted from conforming to being what we wanted to be, represent, have, do, etc. I think Black music has always been a tool of liberation. I think because of the lack of ownership, it's been used as a tool against us. And I think that, especially in the past 50 years, Black music has gone from something that moved us higher to something that kind of kept us in place. And I mean Black music, popular Black music, where we allowed it to become misogynistic. We allowed it to become murderous against our own community. We allowed for it to devalue the things that we once valued. And so, I think that was done, intentionally. If you think about it, just going back to the 90s, some of the biggest labels, Bad Boy, where's Puff these days? Suge Knight, where he at these days? Dr. Dre, Jay-Z, how many of these people outside of music that people wanted to dance to and listen to, and outside of being musical, moguls, what has it done for the Black community as far as education, political power, economic power, educational power? Like, what has it done? And so we really got to have those conversations. I think as we move forward, we're going to see a renaissance in music. I think we're going to see a music with a message, and I think it's going to be popular. I think especially during these times, we're going to see a different want and need out of music, and we'll be able to kind of move forward there. said a lot, talked a lot, we covered a lot. This has been an amazing trip. Our last week, next week, will be a wrap up of the class. We're going to talk a lot about the church committee. The church committee was a committee brought together by a gentleman by the name of Senator Church that uncovered what COINTELPRO did. So we're going to look at the last kind of imprint of the Panthers, with Elaine Brown being the chairperson, Huey Newton leaving the country and then coming back. We'll look at a little bit of school desegregation and some of the accomplishments of civil rights during the 70s. Which allowed for there to be, more opportunities. We'll look at the Backey case as far as it related to school, college, affirmative action, and then we'll kind of do a rundown of the class, and then that'll be it. We've had an amazing semester together. I've had such a great time teaching and leading this class. You guys have been amazing to talk to. The views is going up, so I'm really feeling that. The interaction is going up, so I'm really feeling that. So I want to thank you guys for being a part of this journey. This has been a class 9 where we talked about music, Black music, funk music, and Black liberation. We're going to do it again next week, and then we're out for the semester, and you'll be hearing about me about a class evaluation, and I'll give you a little bit of insight of what I'll be doing next and what to expect from AAS 477 moving forward. This has been a great class. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and we out. Peace.